So friends, from here on, we take up a few short stories by Hemingway, one or two to be precise, so that an in-depth view of this short story can be gained that were written by Hemingway in his lifetime. So without any further ado, I request Dr. Bajaj to give a view of those stories which appeal to her as comment on social life and the human condition.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Prakash. I want to focus on 2 to 3 short stories today. Now, in his collection of short stories that are titled In Our Time, 1925, Men Without Women, 1927, and The Fifth Column and the First 49 Stories, 1938, Hemingway created, a hero, Nick Adams, who's a semi-autobiographical hero. Nick is based on Hemingway's experiences as he grew up and where he went, the war experiences, etc. So he created this heroic figure or hero called Nick Adams, whose life is then chronicled in these stories. And it's not like it's a novel, because he's found in different stories. It's a name that recurs, and it's a way it becomes a joining thread. These are instances and episodes in the life of Nick Adams. And so in a way, when his life is chronicled through these stories, the stories seen together, these collections seen together, they become a sort of a Bildungsroman also, where because you see the early Nick who's shocked to see this kind of violence, and he witnesses this kind of depravity, but then he also grows and becomes a kind of a matured person. So you can see the growth of Nick Adams also if you were to read a couple of his early short stories and later short stories. Now, Hemingway very interestingly once had noted that all modern American literature actually came out of Huckleberry Finn. Right? So you can see the influence of Mark Twain on him. You mentioned, of course, in the beginning Tolstoy and the influence of Tolstoy on Hemingway. I think there's also a very big influence of Mark Twain on Hemingway. And he said all modern American literature came out from Huckleberry Finn. And you find that, like Huck, Hemingway's Nick also wades through evil, violence, often without understanding where he is placed. So he is witness to both human bravery and also human depravity. And these are the two ways in which you also find Huck as somebody who's an observer, who's outside the fold, whatever is happening outside in the world around him, and he often doesn't understand it completely. So he's a witness, much like Hemingway himself. Nick Adams also is a kind of a witness to these kind of episodes that occur in human life. Now, like Huck, you also find that Nick finds no permanent escape from these kind of inexplicable horrors that he finds himself in. He finds people are being killed, we find somebody is being beaten, or some or the other episode in his life, and he keeps telling that, I'm going to leave this place, that I'm not staying any longer in this place. So he enters a town, he comes to a place, and he finds people are absurd. There is strange sort of a violence that exists in these places, and this inexplicable horror makes him feel that he needs to leave this place. But there is no permanent escape, because no matter which part of America he goes, he finds this to be the reality. Hemingway too found that the envisioned American society had collapsed. And therefore he became an expatriate and wandered in France and Spain himself. So Nick is in a way modeled on Hemingway's early life also, his adventures. They are, the one particular episode from his adventure is taken up in the form of a story. For instance, if I take into account the story, The Killers, you find that Nick figures in this story where, on having a kind of a rough experience with the gangsters who've come to a place where he's working, he decides to leave town in order to escape this kind of bizarre violence that he sees in this episode. Now, he notes that he would go and live in a place that is what he calls something less awful. However, Nick is doomed to find evil wherever he goes. So I think that is what Hemingway is trying to also tell us through these different escapades that Nick has. And in the story, The Killers, you find that Nick, who works at Henry's lunchroom, finds himself entangled in a situation where there are two gangsters who are almost identically dressed. They come looking for a man they want to kill. Now, it's very interesting that these gangsters, are wearing both coats. Again, they say they are wearing coats that are oversized, that are too tight for them. And they keep wearing gloves as they eat. So they come to this lunchroom where they want to kill this man, looking for a man that they want to kill. Now, Nick asks the gangster, what's the idea? To which he gets a very straightforward reply, there isn't any idea. Now, knowing Hemingway's aesthetic style, you realize that he's not going to give you anything more than that. I mean, what sense do you make? It's not like there is any kind of clarity given as to why they want to kill. And Nick's question, what's the idea, also doesn't give any sort of meaning, around what he really intends to mean. Of course, you have to guess that he means to only ask, why do you want to kill this man? What's the idea behind doing this? They gag these two people, they tie them up in the kitchen, and they're waiting for a man to come in, but this man doesn't come to the lunch room that he's expected to, but he doesn't. So Nick's question, is succinct, it is terse, and it is brief. So you have to find meaning in it, but there is really no meaning, and that's a very classic Hemingway style. When he says, what's the idea? And the reply is, there isn't any idea. So this suggests that the man that they're looking to kill, they don't even know him. They have probably seen him even only once. They have no personal malice towards him, but they have been assigned a job, and they are puppet figures in many ways. So they are puppet figures who are gangsters. In fact, it is said that they are modeled on the Chicago gangsters of the time, who would come and kill people because they've been paid the money to kill. So they appear strange as they have their gloves on while eating, and they keep repeating a kind of a nonsensical conversation. All of this underscores, a kind of a complete breakdown of meaning in real time or in regular speech. Now, Mr. Anderson is the man who they want to kill. Now, Mr. Anderson, so Nick is sent by the owner of the restaurant to go and inform the man who they intend to kill. Now, Nick runs to the place of this man and tells him, and the man only says, thank you for coming over, right? And he accepts his fate. He is helpless and hopeless in the situation. He keeps lying in bed all dressed and keeps muttering to the wall. So and Nick says, are you not going to do anything about it? He says, no, there is nothing that can be done. So there is a sense that nothing can prevent this kind of a fatal blow that this man is expecting. And in its place, trivialities are focused. For instance, the house help or the landlady says that, oh, it's a nice fall day. And even when we know it's in the middle of an impending tragedy that this man is going to be killed. Of course, the scene is never told to us, and that's where the story ends. But there is very little within it if you were to ask me in terms of plot, what happens, right? The plot is that the gangsters visit a restaurant. They wait for a man to come. The man doesn't come. They have their lunch and they go back. And they of course gag two people in the kitchen. Meanwhile, the restaurant owner sends Nick Adams to this man and to the man that they intend to kill, and this man that they intend to kill also doesn't run away. Instead, he decides to lie in his bed, all well dressed for what? Because he's all well dressed, lying in bed, and he turns his head towards the wall and keeps muttering to the wall. That's where the story ends. What do you make of this?
It reminds me of Beckett, coming up soon. Beckett would be there in the scene in the 1940s,
right.
and he'll present it like that. Mm-hmm. There is a kind of detachment from the crime that people are committing, and they don't even know the wherewithal or the reason of the crime. Mm-hmm. So they are performing a job. Whether it's killing or whether it's reviving somebody, that's not their concern. Right. So where is the idea? I mean, that becomes a very telling question.
But also a sense of apathy, in this generation that doesn't think much of anything, and it's Nick who's concerned that, oh my God, that we are looking at killing of somebody, and trivialities take focus, come into focus, and this is an entire generation which has no sense of emotional connect. As you said, they are disconnected, and there is a sense of larger apathy, which is the real problem in American society, that nothing makes any difference.
Complete alienation.
Complete alienation. And that crime is an everyday affair. And the criminals come in a restaurant and eat their lunch. They're ordering their food, having sandwiches, waiting for the man that they're supposed to kill. So there is no sense of turmoil. It's not like Dostoevsky. The killer is going through a kind of a psychological trauma. The killers just come in, do their job. It's as if they were asked to do some plumbing work. So I think there is this sense of, this is what shocks. I think the sense of apathy and indifference is what
Which
shocks
means the society
reader.
doesn't have a soul.
Yeah, exactly. And I mentioned, if you remember, David Galloway, who says that Hemingway is right. The world Hemingway suggests is a soulless place, constantly threatening people. So this sense of soulless, that this sense of that the society has become soulless is very apparent in the story The Killers. It presents an early stage in the life of Nick Adams, where he's face to face with this sort of a terror and this soulless violence of the age. I mean, there is violence, but this violence is understated, much like Hemingway's own style. His style is so understated, because when Nick says, "What's the idea?" and the killers say, "There's no idea." So the idea that there is understatement both in language and in the age. So violence is understated, but it exists. It's as if on the surface it all appears normal. But again, I think the word is soulless that defines this kind of a thing. In another story, which is titled The Old Man at the Bridge, you find that the scene has shifted to the Spanish Civil War. And there is an old man, and somehow, this old man reminded me of Manto's Toba Taxi. It's very strange, sort of maybe far-fetched also. But, there is a sense that this man is, he has been asked to leave his home, right, his land, because they fear a kind of an artillery attack. And he doesn't know where to go, so he keeps waiting at the bridge. He doesn't cross the bridge. Everybody else has crossed the bridge and gone to Barcelona, but he decides he will not go, because he has his animals that he was taking care of, and he continuously repeats. He's gone mad towards the end. There is an officer who comes in and he says, "Why are you standing here? There can be an attack anytime over here with German forces. So go on the other side of the bridge." But the man keeps staying, keeps sitting near the bridge, because he says, "But my animals are back there, and what would happen to them?" And he keeps repeating, "The cat will take care of itself, but what about the others?" So there is a sense that the man is clueless about the goings on about the war. So it's a very anti-war story, where fascists are attacking Ebro Delta, and this man has been displaced, and this man has left behind, and he doesn't know where to go, because this is all that he knows of his land and his place and home. He has no other there is no sense of home. So when the officer tells him that, "Why don't you go on the other side and go to Barcelona?" he says, "But I don't know anyone there. So what am I going to do there?" So he turns delusional about towards the end of the story, and keeps repeating that I was only taking care of my animals, right? So there is a sense of pathos here, but a sense of a predicament, or a sense of tragedy of the old man, who doesn't know where to go, because he has been uprooted from his place of stay, and no other place, and he knows no one anywhere. So he'd rather die, and that this man would soon meet his end in a tragic way, because he refuses to cross the bridge, and already there are attacks that are that this place has been called a kind of a site of attack. So The Old Man at the Bridge in many ways is the other side of this kind of soulless world that we were talking about, and again giving us a view of Hemingway's own war experiences. That the war leaves you cold, and it has no meaning, and it can very easily make anybody mad, because there is a sense of, there is so much of violence, and there is so much of uprooting that is taking place, that nothing makes sense anymore. So I think as a post-war writer also, you can see how the absurd finally finds its way through these stories.
No, I agree with this, and the way you are quoting, writers from different countries, like Manto from India, and Brecht also, and other people. So one can see, that these stories are happening from 1920 to 1940.
Right.
So the Indian riots occur in 1946 or 7, and before that you have such a scene in France, you have such a scene in Europe, and you
Right.
have such a scene here in America.
Right. So I think it is the war that is, that has a damning effect also on the individual, and that is what was captured in the previous story that I mentioned.
And the minds of the participants in the war, they have become opaque. They don't see anything.
Right,
They
and
don't
they
make
become
any
soulless also in that
soulless
sense,
also, yes.
in the sense that they've become, or has it also normalized violence?
Well, it's a very bad statement to make.
Yes, of course.
Violence is normalized.
Yeah, because
it's a
you
very
see
damning
so much
statement.
of it.
Yes.
The war has brought so much violence, amputation, dead bodies. There is one instance where Hemingway mentions that he was a part of a group where they had to go and look for the shreds of female bodies, and that's actually a part of a book that he mentions in his non-fiction works. That how they were looking for the shreds of the female bodies, female workers who were there. Now, such a gory sort of
Scene and the curiosity.
Yes, that they must go and pick those up. So what remains inside you which you can call human, and which is why I say that you see so much of it that you finally take it in a stride, and it doesn't really affect you the way, or it doesn't really shock you the way it would. So it's not just that, but I think there is that is even worse or more tragic than anything else.
And there's a humanist content in all this, because that is being worked out in the background. In the background of all this violence, there stands a humanity which wants to dream about something else.
Oh, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. So imagine Hemingway coming with all the visions and fighting and going. I mean, he wants to so much be a part of the Red Cross or become a part of Spanish Civil War, that he wants to participate. And in the backdrop, you have all of this happening. So of course, it leads to a complete dissociation in that sense of the individual with one's world, because your view of the world that you imagine that world to be is no more available anymore.
At the same time, you are compelled as a reader to imagine a counter world, the world that you can think for, that you can work for, and that will perhaps be the answer. So the question is raised, the answer is not given, but the question is raised in such black terms that somebody wants to then go into the working of it and say, this is not the world that we belong to.
No, but like take another story for instance, and I'll tell you, you might be able to respond to it in a different manner, because this story is titled Indian Camp. Now in this story, Indian Camp, Nick is accompanying his father, who's still young. Nick, remember, is again semi-autobiographical, as I said, because Hemingway also Hemingway's father was a physician. So Nick accompanies his father, who's a doctor, to an Indian camp where a baby is to be delivered. Now in this Indian camp, you find the delivery is a difficult one, and they go through shanties, and they enter a house where the woman is letting out these terrible screams. The husband, she's lying on a lower bunk bed, while her husband is lying on the upper bunk bed, and he is lying up in the upper bunk bed because he has hurt his foot very badly. He's cut his foot with an axe. He must be working. Now, we are not given the background, but we are only told that he cut his foot very badly with an axe. So, he is there lying in the upper bunk bed, and the woman is lying in the lower bunk bed, and she is about to deliver a child, and it is a difficult one, and she's in pain. She's in labor, and she's in pain. Now, unable to bear the screams of the wife, or it could be that he's stuck in this situation, that he's hurt his leg and he's stuck to the bed, and all he hears is the scream of the wife. Now this husband slits his throat, and the doctor father, that is Nick's dad, he's been able to go through, he's really worked on the woman, and he's been able to have a safe delivery for her, and the child is born. He, when they try to show the child to the father and they go up to the bunk bed, they realize that his throat is bleeding, that he has cut himself. And Nick, as a young boy, asks that, why did he kill himself, Daddy? And the father says, I don't know, Nick, he couldn't stand things, I guess. Do many men kill themselves, Daddy? And he says, no, not many of them. So there is pain, but there is incomprehensible grief.
Yes, very true.
And Nick bears witness to it. Nick is standing in the door of the kitchen and has a good view of the upper bunk where the man would be line when the father, takes the lamp in his hand and tries to show the child to the father, and the Indian's head is back. He turns his head and it's all in blood. So this bearing witness very early on in life to this kind of violence would have a traumatic effect on the boy Nick. And Hemingway, who the story, as I said, is autobiographical in the sense that Hemingway's experiences with his doctor father on such cases he tried to capture here. Hemingway was also wounded in the war, remember? He was seriously wounded in the war, and could be projecting the personal suffering through the Indian man who has hurt his leg. So he understands very physical sort of pain. He understands physical sort of courage, but also physical pain to the degree that can drive people to extremes. And therefore you find in the stories of Hemingway that he depicts these very small areas of hope and courage, or comradeship or love, pain and commitment, in this kind of a world which is way too dark for him and the characters. That's how I look at his stories.
It was very difficult to live in those times, and particularly when the reality was being presented by artists such as Hemingway, as dramatically as here.
Right.
Now there is just the upper bunk, somebody is dead. The lower bunk, the woman is crying, screaming, and nobody, and questions are being raised, and nobody is able to give the correct answer.
Right.
This is the entire thing is so dramatic.
You see, the point is, at one level you see that fine, you can connect war poems, war stories with war, Spanish Civil War, First World War, Second World War, but stories like the Indian camp, where there is no background sort of given to us that it's associated to war or anything. It's only about a kind of a human being who's unable to bear this kind of scream. It reminds me of Edmund Munch's Scream, the painting, which is unbearable for the picture, so the picture is so strong that it tells you that this man is just unable to bear the scream, and driven to that logic that one slits one's own throat. And that is this very human sort of motive. It has nothing to do with the outside world, at least insofar as the given circumstances are concerned.
It's not in his nerves to bear the pain that the woman is going through.
Right.
So he can't even see watching it.
Right. So he can't even hear it, and he's stuck in that situation. So it's more of a metaphor, or you could say he's talking about this kind of extremities that human beings are driven to. That pain, grief can drive you to extremes. So while certain themes are universal in that sense and relate to the individual, there are those that relate to the outer world that they are a part of. So I think Hemingway, I would say, is a difficult writer really to pin him down. One, because he's so terse in his writing. Two, because he doesn't really give you a lot of background, right? There are only snippets of things that are available.
But incontrovertibly, Hemingway is a humanist.
Yes, that's true. And a pacifist.
And a pacifist, which is remarkable in those times.
In those times, being a part of these wars and getting wounded in wars, what would you be? Because you realize the worth of human life. You realize that you value human life in that sense, and you see so much of bloodshed. The man has seen so much bloodshed in his life that he how could he be anything else? Because he is made to go through these experiences, and a world that is fast changing and moving towards a more a kind of in the direction of wild pleasures, turning hedonistic, but also profit oriented, where human life is constantly being devalued.
At the same time, in that situation, people could have turned transcendental, but this person is totally on the earth, on the ground.
Yes, certainly. You see, because his lived experiences have been so real and material and palpable. I don't think that he could move towards any sort of transcendentalism as well.
From Hemingway to the American short story to the European short story, please say something about these three layers of short story discussion in 3 or 4 sentences, if that is possible.
See, I think insofar as the American short story is concerned, it has had its own growth and evolution from being an optimistic sort of a model to a more critically aware or critical realist sort of a model, and turning also sometimes cynical in that sense. So given the kind of changing situation in America, particularly in the first half of the 20th century, given the Great Depression and the American dream before it, so I think in this context the American short story is experimental, but at the same time it very easily moves towards the tragic because there is very little hope. Otherwise also European short stories, I think, turn towards the absurd more than the European short stories turn more towards the absurd than the American, because American are very materialist in that sense. They stay to the actual happenings of the world around them, and they have not turned, for instance, there is very little of modernism per se in American short story, because the past, I think their past revives them, gives them a sense of idealism, but that idealism is broken. So when that idealism gets broken, then they turn tragic, but they don't turn absurdist or purely cynical, like for instance a lot of European short stories do. Now the stories in Europe, according to me, try to work out a model by using these new trends in writing, whether it is surrealism, cubism, modernism, existentialism, for instance. I think, for instance, if you take the French short story, you find that they are trying to use experimentation at a very different level, which is to which takes them towards the universal questions, but at the same time they're very self-conscious of the aesthetic that they are following. So they are consciously following an aesthetic to be able to say something, because they realize that in set speech, in regular grammatical structures, not much can be conveyed through literature. And I think a lot of, and they use the absurd to that end, but also to suggest that it's a generation that is not just lost but also broken.
So friends, with this scintillating discussion, very complex, very difficult to assess and understand, we come to the end of the series from the point of view of Dr. Bajaj, and there might be 2 more lectures, 2 more discussions, and then the entire series, which has really successfully been appreciated by people, viewers, etc. This would be over. Thank you.